Welcome back to the Shared Services Advantage series. In our last episode, we talked about why shared services matter and how it helps you scale with control, especially in a high growth M&A environment. And today, we're answering a different question. When do you actually need it? Because most teams don't build shared services proactively, unfortunately. They build it when things start to break. You might be fresh off of an acquisition, or you're drowning in SG&A, or you're watching ops fall behind, or you're wondering why your ERP isn't fixing the chaos that it's supposed to fix. So today we're going to break down the 5 telltale signs that you're ready or maybe even overdue to stand up shared services. And joining me, as always, is my co-host Gyner Ozgul, who has seen these signs up close. Gyner, how are you doing today?
Good.
So I'm
Um,
excited to dig into it. And the first sign you'll most likely recognize is when growth and acquisitions are outpacing your systems. You're growing fast, but your systems haven't caught up. Each acquisition adds more tools, more workflows, and more inconsistencies. And without standardization, you're really scaling chaos, not capability. So, Ginner, what did that look like in your world, in your previously scaling platforms?
um, you're always behind. You
Mm,
know, like on day one, you are behind. You don't
mm,
know it because you are buying businesses and you're putting them together, and your assumption is the the efficiency of the business. You make two assumptions. One is you're either better than the business that you're buying and you're going to improve it,
mm,
right? Or two is, hey, they're really good at collecting, so as long as they continue doing it the way they're doing it, we're going to be okay. And what
mm,
happens is there's a little bit of a naivety. You go into this naive notion, and
mm,
both those things aren't necessarily true,
mm,
right? Um, there's slippage on day one on the positive side because those resources were really good at collecting, but they also had different jobs before they sold, right? So they weren't doing month end closes. They weren't they didn't have to post as an AP the same way they did. Like they were like fundamentally their whole finance role changes, right? So they get a little distracted, and it's enough where you start to see the slippage, right?
mm,
And then on the other side, you go in there and say, hey, look, this is an opportunity for us. We can go improve their AR as an example. But you
mm,
really don't have the resources to do that.
mm.
So maybe that's a good entry point for the discussion for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And talking about the chaos that comes with every acquisition. The other tell sign here is your SG&A is ballooning, right? But the work doesn't justify the cost, right? You've inherited the inefficiencies. You've got redundant roles. You've got overlapping work, and bloated overhead. And in a remote first environment, you start asking, are we overpaying for low leverage work? Can we consolidate and redeploy talent to higher maybe value activities? When did you start like asking those questions, Geener?
Well, you start asking those questions in the diligence phases,
Mm-hmm.
way upstream, but you really don't get into the detail of it like until you're there, the first couple weeks, right, in the business. And then um, in general, there's like two cuts at this. There's the platform, and then there's the business. There's the business you're acquiring, and then there's the platform, right? And you need to do a reconciliation of both because now you're adding something new to the platform, which inherently gets bigger. You need to start thinking about how does that add more complexity? Do they have a new customer subset? Do they have a new end market? Is there differences or nuances in how they collect? Are they in a different ERP system? There's a lot of questions to unravel there.
Mm. And are you thinking about this pre-acquisition, post-acquisition, during due diligence? In your AOP, like how are you looking at the numbers with your CFO? Like how do you start assessing these opportunities?
Well, you each one is all about cash flow management, right?
Mm,
So you just think about in the private equity world, we have to have a very firm cash flow forecast, right?
mm-hmm.
So you start thinking about it when you start projecting out your cash flow forecast, maybe even a little sooner than that, because you look at a couple of the KPIs that feed that forecast, right? The forecast is the result of running the business. So you start to say, hey, let's look at their accounts payable. Let's look at their practices in AR. Let's look at their billing practices. So an example would be most people count DSO when an invoice is issued, right? But from a customer experience standpoint, DSO actually starts when the technician finishes the work.
The work, yeah.
Right? And you go into a business and you find out that it takes them 10 days to bill from work order completion. And it takes customers 55 days to pay you, let's just say. You're really out 65 days, even though your DSO metric is 55. Your cash conversion of the work is actually longer. So you have to be able, like, early on, you have to look at all those things and say, where can you really drive some improvement? Because every time you drive improvement, you improve your cash position.
Exactly. Execution is slipping, and the symptoms start showing up everywhere. AR is blowing up, billing is delayed, technicians are doing admin work, calls are missed, gross margins are, it's like firefighting. And almost operational breakdowns become the default, especially when there's a lot of system failure and not enough staff. And this is, I guess, where maybe which is the next telltale sign is, your leaders are like maxed out and the firefighting becomes the norm, especially like dealing with non-core issues or maybe not revenue focused opportunities, right? Senior leaders start getting buried in tickets and escalations and process gaps, and they're not leading, they're like surviving. And so when great people are stuck solving the same issues across 5 teams, you've really outgrown your current structure, and you're seeing this across not just one location, one brand, but you're seeing like a pattern. So what was that turning point for you, Gyner? When you're like, okay, I need to free up my leadership team to focus on core revenue activities rather than non-core activities.
It's when you kind of meet with them and you start to see slippage on the core activities, and then you dive into the detail behind it, and you start to find out, because they're working on these, like, so here's the thing. I gave you an example where upstream there's issues with billing, or maybe there's a problem with the work order management system or something like that. That's where I want them to focus, is like, how do we fix it way upstream, right? But they're so focused on the how do I collect
the firefighting, the containment,
the 90 days plus, that they never have time to go back and actually fix the problem upstream, right? And put some energy into it. So you learn that, as you get into it, right? Talking to a CFO and saying, hey, why is our 90 days plus so high? And they get into the detail of it. And it's like, all right, well, what are we doing? Well, I did this, and I had this meeting yesterday, and I had this other thing tomorrow. And it's like, holy cow, you're spending 20% of your time on this right now. Not that it's a bad waste of your time, because cash is important, but how do we get you out of that and get you resources in order to go take care of the problem, right? So that you can free yourself up and go identify what the upstream problem is that's potentially causing all of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of times, when you're looking at these numbers, the case, and especially if you're in a high growth and high pace M&A motion, a lot of it sometimes also, Gyner, and that's the other sign, is like, because of churn, there's just a lot of turnover, and churn is rising, and just HR can't keep up. You're losing people faster than you can backfill, especially after an acquisition. So, culture clash, unclear roles and inconsistent onboarding, just burn people out fast. So your HR teams is buried, recruiting across multiple brands, no centralized process, and just service levels start slipping, And this is where really shared services bring stability, because you've got standardized onboarding, centralized hiring, clear ownership. So have you seen Churn, Gyner, force the shared services conversation?
Churn in people? Yes.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Because how are you going to fix it when all you're doing is churning people? Like, it takes time to train somebody, right?
Mm.
And if you have high churn, so in like one of my past roles, our churn was in the 30% in one of these
Mm.
departments. So for if you know, an easy way to think about it is for every 3 people we're hiring every year, one of them be gone in the next 12 months.
And
Like,
that's maybe considered a benchmark to aim for. We've seen a lot worse.
yeah,
We've seen a lot worse.
yeah. And
Yeah.
what I'm saying is like that is so much churn. So how are you going to get after improving your AR when you have a different problem, which is cultural, and that takes more muscle and more energy and more, again, more strategy, where you know the person, the executive, should be focusing, or not, frankly,
Mm.
because we were, in that case, we were in a very competitive environment where we had call centers and billing centers surrounding us, right
Mm.
up the street from our billing center was the largest collector of student loans in America,
Mm.
right? Their office was literally within walking distance.
Hmm.
So if I'm a biller, like, I have options of where I could work.
Yep.
So, like, if you're worried about trying to do all that, then how you focus on the core issue itself, which is trying to get your cash collected.
Absolutely. Um, Last but not least, and this is something close to your heart. You've been through this multiple times. Is when you've integrated the technology, but not the process or the people, right? You've rolled out an ERP. You've probably spent a few $1 million on it. You've standardized the software, but nothing seems to improve because teams are still using the same tools 5 different ways. Technology without alignment is just an expensive dysfunction sometimes. Gyner, how have you addressed the centralizing technology, or before we maybe even centralize technology, or after we've centralized technology, like how do we address the process dysfunction or the siloed processes and people? And where do you start? Do you
Mhm.
centralize the people first and then the technology? Do you fix the process and then how do you sequence the people, process, technology, centralization, and conversation?
Um, Technology is not going to solve a bad process or bad people.
Hmm.
And sometimes people use technology as a proxy for solving the problems that they should have solved. So, um, technology should be, what are your requirements for the technology, and does it meet your requirements as they're defined? So
Mm.
the way I would do it, to answer your question, organized way, is if you're looking for new technology, it should be fulfilling a problem statement in terms of your existing technologies and filling. As an example, it doesn't allow us to email invoices to multiple addresses on the same site. I'm just making something up, right? So I'm in an office building today, right? It doesn't allow you as a vendor to mail an invoice to floor 5 and floor 6 and floor 7, right?
Mm.
That's a problem statement. And your existing technology is limited in its ability to do that if you have multiple clientele and got it. So now you have a problem statement, which was why you're looking for new technology, right?
Hmm.
But if your problem statement is, well, there's too many steps in my billing in the system, typically that is because you've developed it that way. Whether you
Mm.
know that or not, that's been developed that way. And what you
Mm.
should say is, look at the process you need and see if the system can be configured to the process that you need, and not
Yeah.
customized.
Don't fit your process into the technology. Fit the technology into your
That's
process.
right. And have good process, right?
Yeah.
Um, so I mean, that's, you answer your question. That's the way I think
Yeah.
about it. I
And
don't like the idea of, and then there's performance, right, where you have poorly performing, team members, and you're trying to use the system to get them to be more efficient. No, poor performers are poor performers. You might
exactly.
eke out a little bit of efficiency using technology, but they're still going to be poor performers, right?
Absolutely.
So address the issue.
And that's a good telltale sign is when you've integrated the technology, but just the process, or the people, it's just you're not getting that performance. So that's a good telltale sign. It's like, okay, maybe it's time to bring it all together, standardize, whether, from the type and the profile and the skill set and the KPIs and the scorecards, to the process. This is where you can literally, if you can get, 20, 30% efficiency gain from just the technology implementation, you'll be able to, sometimes double that by, bringing the process, harmonizing the process, and then bringing the people together. And, so those are the five telltale signs. And let's do maybe a quick recap. If you're finding, because of your growth and acquisitions, you're, is outpacing your systems, the execution is slipping and the symptoms are everywhere. That's the first telltale sign. The next one is your SG&A is ballooning, but the work just doesn't justify the cost. Then you're seeing, churn maybe is rising and your HR just can't keep up. They can barely, recruit enough technicians and salespeople for you. But now they're bogged down with, recruiting, billers and accountants and customer service reps. The fourth telltale sign is your leaders are maxed out and stuck in the weeds, firefighting instead of like fixing problems at the root cause. And they're, dealing with, back office stuff instead of like revenue generating, high leverage strategic initiatives. Maybe even sometimes calling customers to collect the money. That's
Yeah.
a good telltale sign that you probably need to free them up. Last but not least, you've integrated the technology, but maybe you're not getting that efficiency. Maybe because due to some, still process breakdowns, or it's still unharmonized, or the people, it's just not centralized. You don't have a systematic way to recruit the same type of profile, or there's no alignment in scorecards or KPIs to really be able to gain that leverage from the technology. So um, even even if two of those feel familiar, uh, you're not just ready. You're already paying the price for not having shared services. So in the next episode, we'll talk about what happens once you make the decision to move forward. We'll talk about how do you identify which areas are ready for shared services. How do you assess where the biggest opportunities are, and how do you prioritize your rollout so you start lean, fast, and focused? So that's it for this
Hey,
episode.
hold on,
I'll
hold
see.
on, hold on, hold on, hold on.
Okay, go ahead.
You led us into the next episode, and I got to say, I'll say one thing on that. I'm going to build on what you said a little differently. You should go into building it with the intent to be successful,
Mm,
right? Sometimes, if you're going to talk about outsourcing shared service aspects of your business,
mm,
people don't go into it with the how do we make this successful, right? That's the
mm,
question you're trying to answer. Like, I need to make this successful. How do I do that, right? So,
mm,
and it's important, right? I know we're closing up, but it's important for people to hear that because our experience. So, Yassin, you're a partner of mine in the past, and I will say I'll give an example of when we got pushback on the I forgot what it was, the server or the firewall. I think you would remember this example,
mm.
right? And I finally
I mean,
told
the
my IT,
infosec and data security is
yeah,
always
yeah, but I
sticking
finally told
point.
my IT person, fine, put the firewall in your backpack. I'll buy you a ticket and take the hardware with you and take it home. Fine, we'll and because I was dead set on making it successful,
Happen.
right? If it fails, it has to fail on its own merits, not because we're not committed to it and committed
Love
to
that.
doing it the right way.
Yeah, and maybe so here's another episode. Some of the pitfalls or blind spots that even though the business case makes sense, but you just can't seem to get it going. Um, Gyner, as always, I'm grateful for the insights and the real world experience that you bring to the table. It's always great to have someone who's lived it and can speak to the practical side of making this work. So with that said, it's a wrap, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you so much, Keener.
Thanks, guys.